I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. 2 Fridays ago, WAMU, Washington, D.C.'s public radio station, which is owned by American University, laid off 16 staffers and closed down its local news website called DCist, which the station had bought in 2018 as a way of expanding to a younger audience and to try to integrate radio and digital news. Media companies are in a tough spot. In 2023, Washington Post did a big buyout to cut staff. Vice has closed down. WBUR in Boston is contemplating layoffs. As we have reported on I Hate Politics, in our very local media market, owner Scott Copeland sold Bethesda Magazine and the accompanying news website, Moco 360, because he did not see a path to break even. When I reached out to the staff at WAMU to ask about how it all went down, I found out that some laid-off employees had signed non-disparagement agreements with the station. But longtime WAMU reporter Martin Austermuhle, who had left the station in August 2023, was not bound by any agreement. Austermuhle, who has been a respected voice reporting on DC for many years, opened up to tell the inside story at his former employer, WAMU. Stay with us. I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are dirty, messy, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it. Music for this episode comes from the Fugazi-inspired Washington, D.C. garage punk band Apollo 66. Travis Hodges on guitars and vocals, Alex Morse on bass and vocals, Sean Henderson on drums, and Chris Morse on the tambourine. You can find them at apollo66rock.com. Martin Austermuhle, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thanks for having me. And I got to say from the beginning, I don't hate politics, but I understand the name of the podcast.
Well, thank you for understanding. It is ironic, mostly because I teach political science.
There you go.
You were a reporter for WAMU and DCS for a long time, but you left 2023. Since then, there have been layoffs and the DCist website has been closed. What has been the most surprising to you about the closure and the troubles?
I think what surprised me was just the fact that the way it was done, I thought the layoffs were done in a pretty cruel way over there. I thought the extent of the layoffs was pretty significant. I mean, losing 15 people at WMU and DCist that's a chunk of people. And I think that an end game is what really surprised me. Like, I know WMU tried to sell this as some sort of media pivot to audio excellence, the way they framed it, but I just don't see it. I mean, they've cut their staff to such a significant degree that I don't know how they can continue to do the job of covering the Washington region. I mean, we're talking about 7 million people spread across 3 jurisdictions, and you have basically 4 reporters left to do it.
What is your sense of what it was like, days before the closure? Was it chaotic? What are your friends telling you?
I left last August, in August 2023, And even then, we knew that there were financial challenges. I mean, our general manager had been honest about it, and we kind of understood a lot of places were being hit by declines in ad revenue, so that wasn't a shock necessarily. But what caught a lot of people by surprise, and this is what they told me, is that even though there was talk last summer of a budget deficit and there was some measures taken, like they decided to stop hiring for a little bit, that there wasn't any follow-up after that as to, well, this is how we're doing, and this is maybe we have to take further measures. There wasn't any sort of hints that layoffs were coming. In fact, people were often asking at staff meetings if layoffs were considered, and they never got a straight answer. So then the week that it all happened, they suddenly get this email calling an all staff meeting virtually, not in person. They're told not to work that day. It's a Friday. They're told not to work at all, just to stay home, to tune in at 9:00 in the morning for an announcement. And they're shut out of their social media accounts, and they're shut out of the station's Slack account, so they can't chat with each other. They could read the tea leaves. They knew that this would mean bad news, but they didn't know it was going to be 15 people being laid off, and they probably didn't know DCS was going to be closed down.
Speak a little bit to what the communication used to be between the management and the newsrooms and how that interaction took place.
So all of this, for people who don't kind of know the inner politics of WAMU, this all happened under a general manager who's been there now for almost 2.5 years. Now,
what is her name?
Her name is Erica Pulley-Hayes. In those 2.5 years, she came in with a lot of kind of goodwill from the staff, like people wanting to give her space to do the work that needed to be done, because there was a little bit of turmoil before she came on. But it became pretty obvious pretty quickly that she wasn't the sort of person to keep people in the loop, especially in the staff. She had a tendency to not really broach dissent. She didn't like people questioning the things she was doing. Actually, and some initial all staff meetings that we would have, she wouldn't even allow people to ask questions. And then after complaints were raised about that, you had to submit questions in writing. And it was only after people complained about that she said, okay, fine, I'll take in-person questions. So she was a little bit closed off to the staff. That was number one. Number two, we got a sense that she didn't want to hear much from the staff when it came to those kind of the thinking about what's WMU going to be in the future, what's DCS going to be, how do we chart a strategic course together. For a year, she had mentioned that she was developing this new content plan, essentially this vision for what DCS and WMU would be doing, how they would cover things, what they would cover. And she kept telling us, like, yeah, I'll get you involved. Like, it's just, this is some initial work. You'll eventually be really critical to developing this plan. And that just never happened. I think people there have still not seen this content plan that in theory is the thing that led to these layoffs. I mean, she says that it was this big pivot to audio excellence or whatever she wants to call it. But no one's ever seen this plan. No one, and none of the people who were laid off had any participation in creating it.
What did they say their solutions to the problem were?
There weren't a ton of solutions. That's the thing. I mean, they said initially we're going to try to stop the bleeding, which makes sense. So they said we're going to freeze hiring for a little bit. We're cutting travel, like the basics, what you start off with. But there wasn't much else. There wasn't much talk after that. We didn't get a lot of details as to, okay, what's the longer term plan? Like, are you going to draw down reserves? Are you going to, are you going to fight with the university because American University owns WMU? Are you going to fight with the university over like the terms of your lease for the offices? Are you going to, like, what are all the things that you can do before you get to layoffs?
When DCS was started, wasn't the entire point of DCS to integrate different mediums? What was the thinking? You were there, right?
It started as a basically a group blog, and this was years ago. This was back in 2004, 2005, in the kind of the heyday of blogging, and there was a lot of neighborhood blogs. And DCS was just a mechanism for people who didn't have professional writing jobs to have an outlet to write about the city that they lived in and that they loved. Now, as it grew, it became just it became an outlet. It became a place that people went for local news, and it became that outlet as more and more places were moving away from local news. So the Washington Post still had a huge metro section, but it was even starting to trim back then. So DCS ended up developing a pretty good digital presence and a good digital personality. Like, it was well known for its kind of quirky take on things. And so at some point, when WMU ended up buying it, the sense was, well, WMU wasn't particularly good on the digital side. Most public radio stations have never been. And they bought DCS because they wanted that audience. The audience skewed a little bit younger. These were people who were committed to local news and really wanted local news. And so it was a smart move by WMU to say, we're going to buy a property that is good with younger audiences, that is good, has developed a solid, has developed solid traffic and solid content, and we can pick it up and use it to further our own mission.
Do you think they ended up truly expanding their audience?
I think what happened in the case of WMU and DCS, that they bought DCS, they cultivated it, they kind of integrated it into the whole public media world, the public radio world. But there wasn't, I felt like what was lacking was honestly an end game, some sort of broader vision as to what this was going to be in the long term. I mean, WMU and DCS were effectively two newsrooms operating under the same institution, under the same roof. And we integrated really well, but there was a lack of a sense of what was going to come next. Like what were we going to become? What sort of stuff were we going to cover? How were we going to cover it? How are we really going to catch, attract readers and turn them into paying subscribers? I mean, we did pretty well with that, but not to the extent that was necessary, obviously.
What was the level of integration between the two newsrooms? Where were the tensions?
When WMU bought DCS in 2018, I believe it was, early 2018.
Yes.
Basically, it brought in a separate newsroom into its existing newsroom. So you had two separate newsrooms under the same roof. So you had DCS and you had WMU, and each one had its own reporters and its own editors. And that was how it initially started. It wasn't ideal. It didn't make a whole lot of sense because there were times where I would show up to cover an event and there would be a DCS reporter there also. So we quickly realized that we had to communicate and coordinate a little bit better. But still, things were operating somewhat independently because DCS was seen as the digital-only operation, whereas WMU was seen as the on-air operation. But during the pandemic, we realized none of this made sense. Like, we were dealing with a torrent of news. We were dealing with just so much coming at us at once that we had to do as much with our resources as possible. So that's when we integrated the operations. We said, everybody's on the same team. We are all just reporters or editors in the same newsroom. We'll coordinate so that we have the best coverage of all the events and all the things that are happening. And every reporter will be able to do everything. So if you're a DCS reporter, if that's what you were, you will be on air. If you were a WMU reporter, you will be on DCS. And so everything that was published digitally would go on DCS. Everything that was on air would obviously go on WMU.
Were you at all following at that time the audiences on the digital side and the radio side and going, they're in balance, they're not in balance? Did you care? Was that a conversation?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the metrics were huge, especially on the digital side, because you can tell exactly who came to the website, when they came to the website, how long they stayed there, if they jumped around between pages, how long they stayed on, for how long they read a story. Like, you had very granular level details, which informed a lot of approaches. I mean, it didn't dictate exactly what we did, but it told us, like, if people are only reading your website, like a particular story for 25 seconds, doesn't mean that you haven't kept their attention well enough. Like, is there something you could do differently? So that mattered. The radio side, of course, there's metrics, but the metrics are tougher to understand because you have less of a sense of how long people are listening for, what exactly they're listening to, what they might like. I mean, those are raw, much broader numbers. I mean, again, it literally is people who have wristbands, and those wristbands pick up what they're listening to at a specific moment in time and gives you a snapshot of who your audience is. But it doesn't give you much more than that. It doesn't give you a sense of like, oh, they were listening to that local story, or they were listening to Wait, Don't Tell Me. I mean, it's tough to tell.
Given the nature of the metrics on the two sides, you're going to have difficulty in achieving that. Right?
The plan to kind of refocus on what WMU does well, which is audio, makes sense. I mean, like, go back to your roots. I think that's not a crazy idea. What I think is crazy is that they seem to be retreating from digital. And that just blows my mind because, look, we are in a world where people get their news in all sorts of different ways. And the audience for terrestrial radio has been shrinking for a while. Like, everybody knows it. Everybody's been seeing the same numbers. We know that NPR's core listenership is older. And during and after the pandemic, even their listening habits changed. So if all you're saying is we're returning to audio excellence, if that just means you're going to do more for terrestrial radio, okay, that's fine. But like, that's not a long-term strategy that you can survive with, in my opinion. and digital is very fickle. I get it. It's tough it's tough to create and to kind of like to get a good solid audience on digital. I mean, people can jump around. Like they're served up so much stuff on a daily basis that how much loyalty are they going to have to any one particular site? That's tough. It's tough to build that loyalty. So again, I realize the difficulties of digital. It's tough, but I just don't see how you move forward in the world of news if you don't have a strong digital presence. I mean, just focusing on audio seems like you're kind of wishing it was still 1995, and it's just really not.
Did the management treat the digital side as a business center, profit center?
When we had the meetings last summer where we were told there was a budget deficit, we were also told that DCS was not making a lot of money. The sort of expected return on investment wasn't there, and most of it they were saying is like ad sales are just really weak right now on the digital side, which is true. It was true across the board, but for DCS, it was. I think they took a particularly hard look because they're just like, look, that's what DCS. That's like on the radio side, you're selling underwriting in the world of public radio. On the digital side, there's just ads, right? I mean, they also had a membership program, but again, it's just I think what it was is just that DCS was not making as much money as they hoped, which again, like happened in the world of digital media. It's not just right. DCS, but the difference is, and this is what ties back to what we were talking about before. It didn't feel like there was ever a strategic vision or some sort of like big push, like, well, then how do we get it to the point that it can start making more money and kick in to make itself worth the investment that you made?
They didn't think about it, but I think you did. What could they have done?
I'm not saying I'm significantly smarter than people in management positions who have to make tough decisions. I realize the finances, the economics of media are very difficult right now. What I saw over 10 years at WMU is that there were moments where different leaders invested in new things and really tried new exciting things. I mean, I know under our last general manager, JJ Yor, we opened a podcasting unit, which is kind of wild to think that we were a public radio station and we hadn't really been doing much by way of podcasting, but we started doing more. We started producing some phenomenal podcasts. And then we did what WMU was well known for. We just kind of, it's not that they killed off the podcasts. They just let them wither. They just didn't invest the amount of resources, so they didn't go anywhere. And so I think that's what it was. It felt like leadership never really had a very strong sense of what they wanted to do. And even if they had a strong sense of what they wanted to do, they didn't match it with resources.
The news model has always been that the hard news side is not a money-making operation. And then you have sports or movies, feature stuff that supports that. In Montgomery County, for example, Bethesda Magazine, the glossy side supports the hard news Bethesda beat and has done it since the beginning. Do we expect hard news to actually start to make money for the first time in history?
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, look, even DCS recognized it and WMU recognized that they knew that, arts and culture reporting, food reporting, that sort of stuff was going to drive. And on DCS had traditionally driven more traffic than hard news. So that's why we kept covering those things. It was important to.
I'm trying to understand how this failed. It shouldn't have, because you really had a good product.
I agree. And I'm not totally convinced that it failed necessarily more than it was just killed. Look, yes, there were budget challenges, there were financial difficulties on the horizon. They had to do something, but they weren't so significant that they would have to do this right now under these circumstances. I honestly would have been, if they had decided to just kill off DCS but keep the reporters, I could have understood that, because like it was confusing to have two brands. Like sometimes it was very confusing to people, like which is WMU, which is DCS, who does what, which one should I go to? So had they consolidated everything and kept the reporters, I could have seen that as a strategy, as a plan to just make things make a little bit more sense. And they had an example for that. I mean, so we were not the only public radio station to buy one of these sites. I mean, over in LA, KPCC, which is Southern California's public radio station, bought LAist, which was a DCS sister site. And you should see what they've done. They got rid of their public radio branding, have gone all in on LAist, and have gone all in on the website. Now they still do radio, but they have committed to the digital side of things.
Do you recall what the impetus was for this unionization? Was there like an expectation that things are not going well? There's no communication. Did that drive the unionization? And what was the result of it?
There were concerns about how much we were being paid and sort of work conditions and that sort of thing, but also concerns about in the world of media. If you get laid off, like, is there any severance? Like, what sort of, what's the process to get laid off? Like, what are under what situations can they lay you off? And, it was more implementing those sorts of job protections that, we felt were important to have given the state of media writ large.
So that seems prescient right now, right? Did it help?
I mean, it certainly helped. The people who got laid off, again, the contract had provisions for how much severance you would get depending on how long you would work there. So I had a colleague who'd been there for a decade. So his severance, I mean, it capped after a certain point, but he got as much severance as the contract would allow, and that's very helpful, obviously. And I think all the unionized employees who were let go are getting more severance than they would have gotten had they not been unionized, which would have been pretty much nothing, or only as much as management would have offered.
What is happening to your friends? Are they just jumping back into other jobs? Are they taking a break? I mean, is it difficult out in the market? It is, I assume. What are you hearing?
I mean, I think most of them are still trying to process what happened just last week. They're still trying to get over, kind of like work through the emotions of having lost a job that some of them had held for years.
Right.
I think plenty of them are going to take some time to reflect on what they want to do next, recognizing that there's not a ton of jobs in media out there. I mean, this isn't the sort of, it's not a market where, if you're looking for a job, you're in a great place, because if for every job that opens, there's probably 15, 20 reporters who have been laid off from other places who are applying for that same job. Mm-hmm. So I think, at least the people I've spoken to want to stay in journalism. They don't want to leave journalism. They feel like it's a very important field. They're very good at what they do. But the realities of media out there are just, it's going to be hard to find another job, and especially in local reporting. I mean, these are very good local reporters, but I wouldn't, if they asked me, I'm not a betting man here, but if I had to bet, I wouldn't say that many of them are going to end up in local news after this. And that's obviously sad. I mean, that's tragic, I think.
It is tragic because, where do you get that training back and that kind of knowledge? The DCist archives won a year-long reprieve. I know you've been, advocating for the archive to be reopened. Do you have a sense of, what it might take, in terms of money to keep it open? Is there somebody else going to take it? Will there be like a benefactor who, you can have their name attached in front and do the identity of the archive?
I mean, it could be the I Hate Politics DCist archive. I mean, if you want to kick in the little money, I'm sure.
How much money is it?
That's the thing. No one really knows. A lot of places have already stepped up. I mean, the DC Public Library already said, listen, this is what we do, and we do well. We collect, we have archives as it is, including digital archives. So it might end up there. It might end up that another nonprofit newsroom or nonprofit organization or maybe a private benefactor says, listen, just tell me how much it's going to cost to keep this online. Tell me what infrastructure I have to invest in, and I'll just get it done.
What is your expectation of what WAMU local reporting is going to look like going forward?
I mean, it's going to be significantly more limited just by virtue of the fact that there's far fewer people doing it. I mean, they have 4 reporters left. Those are 4 very good reporters, but 4 reporters covering an area as big as the DC region is a challenge. So there's only so much reporting they're going to be able to do. And then they're not going to be able to split you're going to see less long form reporting, in my opinion. I think if the expectation is, well, we have to fill newscasts every single day. Well, if you have 4 reporters, that's basically what they're going to be doing. So again, less reporting, potentially less long form reporting or investigative reporting, which is too bad. And I mean, they've promised, the WMU management has promised more local politics reporting. They're going to hire a new reporter to cover DC government, which is what I had done. They're going to cover a Maryland politics reporter finally again. I mean, I'm waiting to see those job ads go up because, again, I'll believe it when I see it, sort of thing. And then they promise that they're going to start a new local show, which would be great. I mean, like, let's be perfectly honest. Like, I think WMU reporters and editors and producers and audiences had been pining for a new local show for a long time. But how you do that with such little staff is the thing that I'm waiting to see. Because again, I mean, there's just talk shows still take staff. You need really good producers. You need a
Tell
host.
me about it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like creating a podcast. I mean, yes, you could do it by yourself. Of course you can. But for, if you're going to do a show on a big radio station, you need staff. And so I'm waiting to see how they manage to pull this off, if they pull this off at all.
Martin Austermuhle, thank you for taking the time. I know you're under a blanket, and I'm sorry for giving your arms a workout, but thank you.
It's totally fine. And to be perfectly correct, it is a comforter. It is very comfortable. It's a little toasty in here, but it is winter in Switzerland. So I can't complain too much.
You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. I'll be back with the wrap-up and lessons from my conversation with Martin Austermuhle, former WAMU and DCS reporter. In this media market, is it noteworthy that DCS closed down and WAMU laid off 16 staffers? Yes, without question. We have a very big election coming up in 2024, but also the District of Columbia has elections that may very well shape the future of the city. Ted Leonsis is trying to take the Capitals and the Wizards out of DC and to Alexandria, a move that may yet fail, at least this year. DC faces serious challenges reviving its downtown and getting a handle on public safety. Neither news nor politics stops because there are no reporters to report them. As Martin Austermuhle points out, there are several million people living in the larger DC metropolitan area, and WAMU now has 4 reporters to cover the region. That's not a challenge. It is impossible. It should also be clear by now that making internet news viable enough to pay journalists good salaries so that the profession attracts talented individuals is extraordinarily difficult. Few have been able to do it. New York Times, maybe a handful of others. But it is worth noting that the top 5 revenue earners from internet advertising are all tech companies: Google, Facebook, others. Not news organizations. Technology, the internet, broke the news business with a paradox. It democratized and decentralized news gathering and reporting, making even this podcast possible. But it dramatically centralized advertising, the means that supported news production. News production is now so decentralized that only gigantic platforms like the New York Times can support professional journalists. WAMU's radio business, it seemed, supported DCS until it became clear to the management that they would not be able to come up with a strategic vision to achieve the integration benefits they hoped for when they bought DCS in 2018. There are several past episodes on I Hate Politics where we explore the different models of local news. I Hate Politics itself is an experiment in embedding a news operation within an academic setting. American University owns WAMU, but the radio station is run separately and even leases space from the university. Can news become a part of the academic mission of a university? Follow us to see where we end up. Of the 16 staffers WAMU laid off, some will return to local journalism, but there will be those who leave the field. Last year, 2023, I interviewed M. Espy, who, as a non binary person, covered the anti LGBTQ book protests in Montgomery County. SP left the profession. Not laid off, but like Austermuhle, left on their own, perhaps seeing the writing on the wall. And when you lose talent like Austermuhle, SP, Hector Alejandro Arzate, Jacob Fenston, Jenny Gathright, Morgan Baskin, Rebecca Cooper, Abby Mansour, Chris Chester, Teresa Frontado, Eric Falcaro, and many more, it is hard to build that talent and knowledge back up. That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, and assistant producers Daniel Galileo and Katarina Gasek, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from the Fugazi-inspired Washington, D.C. garage punk band Apollo 66. Travis Hodges on guitars and vocal, Alex Morse on bass and vocals, Sean Henderson on drums, and Chris Morse on the tambourine. You can find them at apollo66rock.com. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. Don't forget to tune in to I Hate the News on Tuesday morning.